Welcome, dear friends, to the last lecture of our course, The Life of Chords. And today we're going to ask the question whether life is possible without them. This story, the story of dissolution of tonality, the emergence of atonality, and then the creation of new ways of organizing this atonal music into 12-tone, for example, serialist music, was a story that used to be told when I was young as a story of progress. Yeah, this great sort of going up the steps of human musical evolution towards greater complexity and more and more things happening in the music and so on. Yeah, so in the last, at that point, when we were telling this story that way, and every single textbook would tell you the story precisely this way, at that time, composers who didn't do atonality, somebody like Rachmaninoff, for example, were completely marginalized. Yeah, they were not written about. They were kind of almost embarrassing to mention if you think about 1950s. Not even Rachmaninoff, just Rachmaninoff and Shostakovich. Until recently, I used to look up a Wikipedia article on 20th century music, and Shostakovich was not even mentioned there, because he was not actually sort of part of this great magisterial road through the century, or the road of progress. But things have changed in the past few decades, and more composers are learning at the conservatoires not just to write atonal music, but also to write tonal music, and that might be their preference. That certainly seems to be the preference of concert organizers who would hardly program these days music by Schoenberg or Boulez. So today, after I tell this story to you again with a different ending, we are going to have a little mini recital by Alexander Suarez, who specializes in this kind of music. So let's begin. There are three ways in which chords start to disappear. Yeah, there are three things. I will present them in several chapters, all these events. But basically, there are three main routes. Yeah, so one thing to do to tonality, to make it disappear, is to gradually weaken the harmonic function of the chord. Yeah, so we were talking in, say, lecture 2 of the course about how the dominant seventh was a very powerful dynamic chord that wanted to resolve into the tonic. Well, if you add a few notes to it, a few extra notes, it loses this dynamism. It becomes more static, doesn't want to resolve, so the tension resolution is not perceived by us quite so strongly. You can weaken it another way. We're going to look at these things a bit later. The second way of doing it is to write more polyphonically. If you remember in lecture 1, I was telling you that chords sort of gradually arise out of polyphony. Yeah? So there are all these independent lines which form various sort of vertical things, and eventually they crystallize into chords that we now recognize, and we give them names. Yeah, so here the opposite happens. Yeah, so music becomes less vertical and more horizontal, and there are more and more things happening. And again, we have these vertical sonorities that we don't know how to explain, don't know how to name. And the third way is just to get rid of the 12 notes altogether. Yeah, why should there be just 12 notes? Yeah, we can invent alternative tuning systems. Why not 48? Why not 36? Why not 72? Why not 49? Right? So, but when we do that, then familiar chords disappear as well. Yeah, so most of the things that I'm going to talk about are going to fall into one of these three categories. So we'll start with people who were tearing up the rule book, yeah, because in the 19th century, music is still governed by certain rules. Yeah, you're not supposed to do parallel fifths, for example, in your voice leading. You're not supposed to follow. You're supposed to follow one chord with another, and so on. But we have mentioned already that Franz Liszt, for example, was especially inventive in the way he used diminished and augmented chords, yeah, and that weakened tonality as well. So there is this piece that he wrote in 1881, and it wasn't published during his lifetime. It was only discovered in 1927, and it became one of these landmarks, yeah, of atonality, on the road to atonality. Because although it still has a key signature and pretends to be in G minor, it doesn't actually sound like G minor at all. It has all kinds of strange, again, augmented chords, and the most important thing is how it ends. Yeah, it seemed to end on the chords that are not only dissonant, but they don't seem to have anything to do with the G minor at all. Yeah, so it's a kind of great, strange thing that happens there. So one might think, well, maybe it's a fragment, maybe he didn't finish it. But, well, it seems to be a completed piece. That's how we take it. So let's have a look at how it ends. Let's hear it. So, enigmatic ending. So when that piece was discovered, obviously people who were very much into this narrative of modernism, yeah, going further and further forward, used it as an example, as an important point. So much so that composer Mauricio Kagel actually, in 1972, deconstructed it into little bits, you know, so took all the motifs and chords away, mixed them up, and even used all the pedal sort of markings and made the pianist perform them separately. So let's hear how that happens at the end. It gets louder and louder. And at the end, they shout List and Ziel, yeah, so to make it, read it backwards as the go, yeah, so List is leading us to this go of atonality. Now, a much more interesting, probably, case in terms of narrative is Debussy, because it was pronounced by Pierre Boulez as somebody who awakened modernism with this piece, yeah, Prélude de l'après-midi d'enfant, symphonic piece from 1894. And, you know, today we might not notice it. What's so striking about this piece? It sounds extremely nice. Yeah, it sounds like a warm bath, as some of the French composers of later generation used to say. Yeah, the very sensuous harmony. What's wrong with it? Beautiful, quite unexpected various turns, yeah, but all very beautiful. Well, people were really perplexed by the fact that they could not identify all the chords and why that chord was there. And people like Rimsky-Korsakov were especially angry, yeah, because Rimsky-Korsakov wanted to understand how it works logically, yeah, and it didn't seem to work logically to him. He liked the sounds, but he wanted to produce them in a logical way. So Debussy made a lot of these kind of rule-breaking statements. These are some of them. Tonic and dominant had become empty shadows of use only to stupid children. The prelude that I've just played to you shows a disdain for the so-called constructional know-how that places a burden on our finer intellects. It has no respect for tonality. Nothing more mysterious, he says, than the consonant chord. Despite all theories, both old and new, we're still not sure, first, why it is consonant, and second, why the other chords have to bear the stigma of being dissonant. Yeah, and finally, there is no theory. You have merely to listen. Pleasure is the law. Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, he exaggerates. He had great experience of writing tonal music, and he knew how it worked. But nevertheless, he didn't feel that he needed to be constrained by these rules anymore. One of the rules that he breaks is the rule of the parallel fifth, yeah, and parallel octave. So he actually writes a whole piece, yeah, which is sort of consists of these parallel octaves and fifths. But what looks like chords to you, they are these vertical things, yeah, vertical sonorities. They are not actually acting as functional chords. They don't seem to have any function. They seem just like a doubling of the melodic line, like something that would happen, for example, on an organ, yeah, if you pull another stop that adds a fifth to it. So essentially, it's not a sequence of chords. It's not a progression. You have just a melodic line, which is kind of embellished, decorated with these beautiful sonorities. In the middle section, though, these chords suddenly become chords, and they create something like a cadence. We're in C major, yeah, there's no question about that. And then towards the end of the piece, they stop being chords again, even though he now adds a little dissonance to it, very mild, lovely dissonance. He adds the sevenths into these sonorities. So this is why people were so perplexed. Yeah, they didn't know how to treat them. Should we treat them as chords within a progression or just as something sort of entirely decorating the melody? Our next chapter is called Too Much to Take. You will see why. We will start with Schoenberg's first quartet, which he performed with Gustav Mahler attending, and showed to Mahler. And Mahler was perplexed by it. He didn't know what to make of it. He wanted to be very supportive of Schoenberg. He thought that Schoenberg was extremely talented, but he couldn't make sense of it. And that happens, yeah, because there's too much going on polyphonically. There's all these lines, although there are only 4 of them, they create sonorities that even Mahler's ear couldn't quite catch. And it sounds very nicely in D minor, and already on the second page, you will hear that it's not in a major or a minor. So Mahler said to him very honestly and openly, I have conducted Wagner's most difficult scores. I have written complex music myself in scores of 30 staves and more, yet here is a score with no more than 4 staves, and I am unable to read them. And Schoenberg, reminiscing about this meeting, says the most embarrassing circumstance was that the harmonies produced by those independently moving parts changed so fast and were so advanced that the ear could not follow their meaning. And in the same article, he says that that as in the earlier epoch, so before chords, harmonies will now be a product of the voice leading, justified solely by the melodic lines. And now things get even more interesting in Schoenberg's second quartet, only a few years later. So it's in 4 movements. The first 3 have key signatures, and the last one doesn't. Yeah, so finally, Schoenberg sort of decides to admit there is no key in this piece. And this coincides with him using a poem by Stefan George, which says at this point, I feel the air of another planet, of another planet. So this is how it sounds. Oops. So the poem is entitled Rapture, and it's a transcendent moment. So actually for Schoenberg, it was a very important moment in his personal life when he was overcoming a huge personal trauma and coming out of it, looking forward rather than into the past. And it's interesting how you can read it as almost a manifesto of this new atonal world. I dissolve into notes, circling, weaving in groundless thanks and nameless praise, surrendering without a wish to the mighty breathing. Because, of course, Schoenberg believed that it was historical necessity that moved him from tonality to atonality. And a slightly less poetic explanation of what happens in this movement by Schoenberg is the overwhelming multitude of dissonances could not be counterbalanced anymore by occasional returns to such tonic triads as represent a key. So we give up on the key, although actually this quartet still ends on a triad of F sharp major. Next year, things get even more exciting, and now various formal aspects are also given up. Motivic development is sort of given up, and there's a free-for-all situation when you have music that seems to be expressing something very freely without being constructed at all, and that goes, of course, hand in hand with the artistic movement of expressionism, which was all about expressing the subconscious, so something that could not be expressed in a more constructed way. That's why the writers start writing in a stream of consciousness way, for example. Freud discovered psychoanalysis, just a few decades before. It all happens in Vienna. So this is the kind of music that expresses the inner self. Vasily Kandinsky, so somebody who, from a sister art, from painting, who was at that time looking into similar ideas in the visual arts, into abstraction, of getting rid of figural art in the same way as Schoenberg was getting rid of tonality. So he was present at the concert where the second quartet and these pieces, Opus 11, were played. This is actually his picture from that concert. That big black thing is a piano, believe it or not. Yeah, but you see, it's almost abstract. Yeah, it has these figures, but they might as well be something else. And Kandinsky was so impressed that he started corresponding with Schoenberg, and they worked out various ideas together. It's one of very interesting moments, yeah, when really two arts, yeah, in the same zeitgeist sort of intersect very closely. But not everyone was as enthusiastic as Kandinsky, and the normal kind of review that Schoenberg would get for this would be like this one by Arthur Hahn. The almost hair-raising cacophony seemed rather too much, even for those who had so far kept a straight face, as they followed Schoenberg's Weltschmerz and its musical revelation. Yeah, so he's mocking him. One can only shake one's head in astonishment at his effrontery in trying to pass off this kind of thing as music, in the sense that this term has always been understood. These sound effects gave rise to accidental convergences of notes entirely at random. By mere chance, we might expect occasional combinations of notes that sound harmonious to our ears. Schoenberg, however, and this is the only thread of consistency in his composition, deliberately selects only sounds at the opposite end of the spectrum from whatever could sound right to our ears. Yeah, so kind of being deliberately contrary and trying not to give you, even by accident, any triads or anything that might please you. And that was a very typical type of criticism. Now, let's look at other ways how atonality could be achieved. We are going to look at a few sort of transcendent pieces that are really reaching for the holy grail, all 12 notes of the chromatic scale sounding together. You might remember I played to you Scriabin's, the beginning of the Prometheus, the mystic chord, which only has 6 notes, but it already sounds good enough to represent the cosmos. Yeah, so almost like a kind of noise. And Scriabin, of course, in his final work that he never got to write, in the Mysterium, was thinking of getting to all 12 notes, and he called that chord the chord of the pleroma. Yeah, so the chord of plenitude, of everything being embraced by it. We have a few more examples around the same time. It's interesting how composers from various countries trying the same thing, and always in the context of some kind of transcendence. So Alban Berg from Altenberg Lieder, Beyond the Borders of All We Know. Yeah, so so another 12-note chord. Alfredo Casella, same year, 1913, his piece which is called Notte di Maggio, May Night. Here he uses a chord which he calls the natural harmony of the atonal system, because the question is, well, if you write atonal music, where is the tonic of it? Yeah, what is the main chord? So he says, well, this is the main chord of the atonal system. Yeah, it includes everything, and then you can just pick and choose from it as you go along. So here we have this moonlit, mysterious landscape, and at the moment when he perceives all the souls of the dead populating this landscape, this is when we get this chord. In a completely different place, Charles Ives uses that chord. You can even see, he's really trying to occupy almost all a range that is available to him and the orchestra. So he wrote this about, it's also about the landscape. Yeah, it's about a river in a particular place. And he always imagined nature as being kind of consisting of different things going on at once. And at the end, they all come together in this joyful cacophony, which is sort of divine, transcendent moment, yes, yet again. was also, of course, a very different approach of compromising tonality, so to speak, yeah? Without getting rid of it altogether. And the root of that we can find in a piece by Mozart, which you might know, which ends in a very strange way. Yeah, a musical joke. Yeah, so it's about the ensemble of village musicians who've gone wrong at the very last moment. So if you saw at the end of the score, you had the three keys stacked together, yeah, different keys. So that is what people like Stravinsky start doing, also at first humorously and then completely seriously at the beginning of the 20th century. One of my favorite moments is in Petrushka, and I'll play the solo piano version so that you can hear it more easily. So there is a folk melody, and it has a harmony that we kind of imagine, a very simple harmony, dominant and tonic. And he would take this bass, yeah, if you can see these little notes, yeah, he would take it regularly at the right moments. And then this bass suddenly separates from the harmony, and it comes at the wrong time. And then it becomes the wrong bass. Yeah, so the harmony is separated from its bass for a moment. So you get this strange displacement happening. In random, as if it exists separately from the rest of the chord. So in Petrushka, it's all sort of great fun, and it has a humorous effect. But when you get to the Rite of Spring, everything is displaced, and this is how one of the critics described it as early as 1914. Yes, the Rite of Spring is 1913, and the next year, the Russian critic Vyacheslav Karategin describes it as displacement, which is very similar to Cubism. Yes, you have seen all futurist paintings, you have read futurist verses, and you have, of course, noticed that displacement is the characteristic feature of futurist art. Either the two eyes in the portrait have skittered to different corners of the painting, or else the letters in the word have been rearranged, mixed up. And what Stravinsky is doing in the right is founded mainly on displacement. Tonalities are displaced, they have begun to pile up on top of one another, and intervals are displaced, octaves have suddenly slipped down into sevenths, and rhythms are displaced. Everything has been shifted and shuffled. I wanted to give you a little bit of the ballet version, yeah, with the original choreography, to see, so that you could see that actually when you see it with the choreography, it is much easier to listen to, because it makes sense that every group of dancers sort of have their own key, more or less. I'm sure you know that both Schoenberg and Stravinsky at that time had scandals at the premieres. Yeah, so people were not prepared to take it. Yeah, they really thought that they were being made fun of. And indeed, there was a lot of fun involved, like in a piece which he wrote for Diaghilev. And it's a kind of polka which has very primitive harmony. Basically, nothing happens in the harmony. But the melody has lots of wrong notes, yeah? So it kind of just gets into a key where it shouldn't be. he just insists, on this being out of tune, pretending that one of the pianists cannot actually play or playing the wrong notes. And as Stravinsky himself described Alfredo Casella when he heard this piece, was so impressed by it that that's the moment musical neoclassicism was born. So because basically what happens is you have this displacement, but now the material sounds familiar. In the Rite of Spring, it wasn't necessarily familiar. But here, it's something very easy, something familiar that you are distorting in a very deliberate way. And it sounds funny. And eventually, as these harmonies started getting into the mainstream, and during the 1920s, neoclassicism really became the musical mainstream. And our ear, started getting used to it and didn't even feel that there was anything particularly wrong with them or funny about them. So even a distorted cadence still sounds like a cadence sometimes in Stravinsky. But there was also this is an extension of this idea of stacking up keys, which we can name as bitonality or polytonality. So once again, you can see here that if you look at the beginning of the score, that the left hand is playing in B flat minor, and the right hand is playing in F sharp minor. So he has two key signatures. It's kind of in your face bitonality, even though actually it doesn't maybe sound that dissonant. So these loud chords, they're supposed to kind of mock a cadence. So it's supposed to look like a cadence, but of course doesn't sound anything like a cadence. Darius Milhaud, a French composer who really made a trade in bitonality and polytonality. So this is quite a famous piece of his, Copacabana from Saudades de Brazil. And actually, I think bitonality doesn't spoil it. It still sounds quite sexy. An English composer who heard this wrote about this in 1933. This is music on two planes, but surely of the most facile, the most banal description. Just naughty, perverse. This music, or anti-music, is, in spite of the incongruity of its part, definitely harmonic. So it still definitely has chords. It's not actually polyphonic, and yet it is perverse. Its tonality is used against itself. Well, Milhaud, as I said, made a meal of polytonality, and here in this extract, he claims to be using 5 keys simultaneously. So this is kind of his own analysis. So listen, and he uses quite simple kind of folk-like material in the voices so that you can hear them better separately. But it's still a moot point whether we can actually, our ear can distinguish, 5 or 6 separate layers. So, again, even naughtier, even more perverse. So, as I mentioned, why stop at 12 notes? There were 3 reasons why people started getting interested and going beyond the 12 notes. One was that they found out about other cultures, such as the Javanese gamelan, for example, which is not based on equal temperament. Another reason is that technology allowed them to create instruments now that could do quarter tones, or even smaller divisions of the tone. And the third reason, some people were interested in kind of historic scales, the Greek scales, which already had these microtones. So, well, let's look at the piece by Arthur Laurier, who was a kind of futurist, and he would do any new thing, any avant-garde thing that was going. So this is what he wrote in 1912, Prelude for quartetto and piano. Sounds very strange. Yes, sounds like Scriabin being played on out-of-tune piano, because the chords are kind of Scriabin-esque still. Well, this is probably sort of sounds more independent. Alois Hubbard also, that was his trade, microtonal music. So he built this harmonium, which had 36 notes in the scale. And he uses them in more polyphonically, so you can actually hear these little divisions of the tone in independent voices. To a chord, it really sounds horrible. There's nothing you can do about it. So, microtonality still exists, but it sort of never became mainstream, despite all the great claims of them liberating the music from this prison of 12 semitones. The next chapter is called Ending the Chaos. It was Webern who, reminiscing of those 10 years after atonality was sort of discovered by Schoenberg, that were the years of chaos and blind gropings for some kind of new way of organizing music, because it was terrifying not to have any rules at all. So Webern, when he was talking about the new way of organizing music, the 12-tone or serial way of organizing music, he showed this classic palindromic table. So sator, arepo, tenet, opera, rotas, which you can read the same way in 4 different ways. Starting from the left top like this, and also down, and starting from the right-hand side down corner also in 2 ways, up and to the left. So this is, the first time it was found in Pompeii, I think. Nobody really knows how to translate this. There's about 1 million translations, but sator is sower. Arepo seems to be a name, so the sower of seeds, arepo, takes good care of his wheels, for example, something like that. Well, the point is, that now if you imagine every letter being a musical note, what Webern wants to do is to create this symmetrical structure that would work in the same way. This is, for example, a square that can be created for his Symphony Opus 21. And then every one of the notes, the way he uses them, is kind of isolated. It's almost like sort of pointillist painting. They are separate in the musical space. They don't seem to form melodies that easily. Even the familiar textures are absent. This is an extremely sort of symmetrical row, and I don't have time to go into this, but basically what you can do, so you decide on how you want your 12 notes to be arranged, so that's his main row or series at the top. And then you can do 3 types of things with it. You can play it backwards, which is what the palindromic principle tells you to do. You can also rotate it sort of symmetrically in relation to the first note. So all the intervals that would go at the start would go down, would start going up. We'll get the second kind of mirror reflection around that central axis. So that's the second operation. Then you can combine them and you will get the retrograde inversion. So you can play it backwards as well. And then you can transpose them, of course, that you can shift it, yeah, to every single note of the 12, out of the 12. Yeah, so you get all these possibilities. But the striking thing was this isolation, yeah, of individual notes and completely new texture. It's really otherworldly music. Not all 12-tone music sounds like this. You know, some of it by Schoenberg, for example, sounds more kind of human and normal because it still has something that resembles chords, even though they are usually dissonant. And Schoenberg is usually credited, or he credited himself with the invention of this completely kind of artificial method of organizing music. But there was another composer called Joseph Hauer who did it just a couple of years earlier, and we shouldn't forget about him, although he was much more modest than Schoenberg, so he wasn't trying to promote himself. But they actually communicated, corresponded with each other, and even wanted to write a book together about this method. So this is Hauer's music. Now, as you can imagine, all that time through the 20s when neoclassicism was mainstream, atonal music basically was the term of abuse. And this is what Alban Berg, who was interviewed in 1930, complained about. Yeah, he said that this term has come to stand collectively for music of which it was assumed not only that it had no harmonic center, but that it was also devoid of all other musical attributes, such as melos, rhythm, form, in part and whole, so that today the designation as good as signifies a music that is no music at all. And the term is used to imply the polar opposite of whatever was previously considered to be music. And so that's 1930, that's still the situation. And he is trying to argue against it. And he says, well, melody for us is still fundamental. You might not find this periodic structure, kind of rhyming structure of cadences, but the music has a freer rhythm like prose, yeah, as opposed to poetry. The freer rhythm, kind of on a small scale, comes from a combination of individual lines, just like it does in J.S. Bach. And the one thing he wants to reassure his public about, that every single bar has been subjected to the sharpest control of the outer and inner ear. Yeah, so we're not just taking you for a ride. Yeah, this is not just random. We have thought about it. We bear responsibility for every single bar of this music. So now let's look how that changes. How do we give up control of the ear? So Pierre Boulez, at the beginning of the 1950s, wanted to have even more control. Yeah, so he thought, well, if you can serialize pitch, yeah, which is you see on the top, let's do the same with all the other parameters of music, such as rhythm. Yeah, yes, let's use note values, which will be also serialized. Let's use dynamic, well, which is a bit of a can you really have 12 levels of dynamics? But, you know, you can serialize them as well. And modes of attack, yeah, so that every note would be struck in a different way with different kind of accent. So then he arrives at this mechanism, yeah, that he can set in motion, and the music then comes out almost automatically, and this is what it sounds like. So that is kind of not really organized by human ear. Yeah, it's something that's been there's a pre-composition phase, and then it sort of runs itself on the mechanism that has been put into practice. And at the very same time, American composer John Cage was writing music that would sound probably to our ear very similar, but based on chance. Yeah, so he used a Chinese divination book, I Ching, yeah, to create these sounds just by, as you would do fortune telling, yeah, just by kind of looking at the chart. Interesting thing that Cage and Boulez also corresponded, and they discussed these things together, even though, yeah, they seem to be coming to the same result from very opposite sides. So one through chance and another one through these very, very tight organizations. But what they both want is to get rid of the past, to get rid of these habits and tastes of previous music. So they deliberately want to write the music that nobody has written before, and it has nothing to do with it. So only for a short moment they intersect, and then they go their own separate ways. And, you know, Cage, for example, writes 4 minutes, 33 seconds of silence, yeah, and Boulez and other composers were trying to make the music even more mathematical, up to the point that Milton Babbitt famously says, well, music should be like physics or maths or engineering. It should be just done in universities. And, you know, it doesn't matter whether you don't understand it, because it's like science. I mean, you're not understanding, not everyone would understand the theory of relativity, you know, some higher mass. Why should you think that you should understand it? Yeah, so once he published his article, and the editor added a title, "Who cares if you listen?" Yeah, so it wasn't actually his title, but it entered musical history as this kind of really moment when the listener is not needed anymore. Yeah, so, and you can see that, you know, Cage's I Ching tables and Boulez's matrices, they kind of look similar, even though we come from different perspectives to the same result. Now, interestingly, in the 50s, atonal music finally becomes mainstream. And this was Schoenberg's dream, and what Schoenberg already died. And at that point, suddenly, even Stravinsky defects to the other camp. So he starts doing 12-tone music. And it wasn't just taught at the conservatoires now, but also it appears in film scores. The first film score that is written with 12-note technique in it is The Cobweb, 1955. Yeah, that sounds familiar. That sounds like the sound, yeah, from the 50s to the 70s. This was mainstream film scores that were written. In jazz as well, yeah, jazz becomes atonal at that point as well. So Jimmy Giuffre, for example, the fugue. Just it's written polyphonically, yeah, so not with chords, but with lines, but also atonally. And even more excitingly, Ornette Coleman's band, which introduces free improvisation and this kind of collision of different lines. almost nostalgic, yeah, now listening to this, yeah, so that it's a sound that we once have gotten used to, and then now we are not used to it anymore, perhaps. Oh, okay, now very quickly on the return of the chords. So just as we thought that atonal music was everywhere and composers were primarily learning in conservatories how to write music in a 12-tone way, there was another kind of countercultural movement which got out of California, and it wasn't at first even viewed as art music. It was something, yeah, that was kind of on the a fusion maybe of art music with pop music, and then it became mainstream, and now it is still mainstream. We call it minimalism. The point was that it introduced a different way of listening to music, and it was more about sort of meditation and focusing maybe on a single note or on a single chord for a long time, sometimes things developing very slowly. And gradually, in the course of this, people started getting back into chords. Philip Glass, for example, he says another look at harmony, I think it's 1972, when he actually creates something very much like progressions of tonal music. Or, for example, John Adams, he actually calls one of the sections of his grand pianola music on the dominant divide. Yeah, and he gives you a chord which we've described as, I think at one point, a third inversion of the dominant seventh. And he holds it for so long. If we have enough patience, we might get to the tonic. Of that dominant to the tonic. Yeah, so that's how tonality gloriously comes back. It also comes back in polystylistic music when people want to pit atonality against tonality. And sometimes, yeah, tonality is associated with the good and atonality with the evil, as in this piece by our Pert. So it starts with Bach. And then it will be compromised by of hellish idea of atonal music. Yeah, and then eventually, yeah, the single note will come back again as salvation. Yeah, so you can see how there's going to be this dichotomy. But I wanted to go back for a moment to that interview that Berg gave in 1930, who said, "I tell you, this whole hue and cry for tonality comes not so much from a yearning for a keynote relationship as from a yearning for familiar concords, let us say frankly, for the common triads." And it seems to be true, because the most downloaded music today is by somebody called Ludovico Einaudi, and that is what he practices. Yeah, these common triads. Let's hear it. That's all you need, 4 chords, nothing else. Yeah, then you will have a long sort of sequence of repetitions of these 4 chords. And this is what people love, I think, most of all, and they download in their millions around the world. Now, at this point, I'm going to invite, finally, Alexander Suarez to the stage, and we're going to have a little chat before he plays this program of music. Please give him a round of applause. Alex, could you tell us something about the pieces that you're going to play?
Yes, so we're going to start with a short prelude by Olivier Messiaen, who I guess is somewhat of an outsider in context of the talk tonight. So he was a French composer who was inspired by a whole host of things: the natural landscapes, the stars, the cosmic stars, and above all, birdsong. So you hear some snatches of that. Then we move to a couple of early 12-tone pieces. The first by Arnold Schoenberg. We have the 6 little pieces, of which I'll be playing numbers 2, 4, and 6. And then by Boulez, the Notation, which is his very first experimentations with the form. But you see in this Notations all of the ideas which you later find in his later works, so structures and some of his later works that were discussed today. And then finally, John Adams' China Gates, a wonderfully haunting piece.
So for you as a performer who actually recorded your Notation by Boulez, and you're one of the few people who have done that, how do you find, working with this music? Is it something, is it really a test of learning, or test of sight reading, or test of memorizing, or?
Yes, in fact, it's a real test of memorization above all. I remember when I first started learning, there's one of the movements, I'm not playing this one tonight, but it's a row of semiquavers. I think there's about 300 that jump up and down the piano. And it was really a case of just one note after the other and practicing that for hours, and then you add one more note in. But eventually, I think you begin to find the composer's language that he's using, and that's really the way in. But of course, there's kind of huge kind of emotional challenges as well. I think it's easy for the music to feel abstract when you first start it, but finding the kind of humanity, I think, is a really important way in to find the expression of these pieces.
Mm-hmm. And we have to say that they are quite short, yeah, because
yes,
people might think that they're here for another hour. And there is a reason for them being short, I guess.
Yes, I think there's the ultra kind of concentration of musical thought. So you have these very brief snapshots for both the Schoenberg and the Boulez. So you have almost like you're immersed in this sound world and then withdrawn almost as quickly.
That's great. So how are you going to divide them? Are we going to know which one is which?
So the Messiaen prelude ends with a huge flourish in G major, which almost has a kind of metallic kind of overtones afterwards. And then there's a very clear divide with the Schoenberg, which begins with a very kind of very curious ostinato which repeats. There's the 3 movements there, and then we have the first of the boules, which in a similar way begins with 2 sonorities that you find, which also has a little ostinato, which was based on a dirge from Asian music. And then I think you'll recognize the sound world of John Adams. You have this wonderful, lush sound world.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. You played it so beautifully and so emotionally as well. Yeah, but I want to say that probably, there's no better vindication for atonal music as to be performed in this way. But I wanted to just make a little conclusion because it's the last lecture of the series and actually my last lecture as Gresham Professor of Music as well. So I want to ask this question again. So what happened with atonal music? Is there something sort of essentially unviable about it? Is there something that is kind of unnatural about it? Because in these days, even our Cambridge composition students, well, Alex was my student a long time ago, but these days, you will not believe, but people actually, would hear something, a piece of modernist music and say, well, it's complete chaos, I don't understand anything, I don't want to engage with it, which would have been unheard of like 20 years ago, right? So something has shifted towards tonality. And one of the labels, that was attached to atonal music always was kind of that it was dehumanized. And it starts with Ortega y Gasset's famous essay of 1925, which is called Dehumanization of Art. And he actually writes about music, but not about music, the music you might think of. He writes about Debussy, and he says that Debussy is one of these first people who kind of removes narrative and empathy from our reaction to the music, and therefore dehumanizes it, therefore makes it more, this human connection not possible, so that we kind of start perceiving it in a more distant way. And he sees it as a good thing. He says modern art is unpopular, and it's a good thing because we don't want the masses, we don't care what the masses think. It's for connoisseurs, it's for someone who understands. And this is the kind of art which would make the emphasis on the how it's done rather than what is expressed, which you will have seen in a number of examples that I presented today. And if you look at somebody like Theodor Adorno, who writes about in 1956, so at the height, at the apex of atonal music, he says what music basically, as a result of this development, lost its possibilities to communicate, to be more like a language, to be intelligible. And this is what he says. He says it in very strong words, but with the prescription of everything that is even remotely similar to language, and that's of every musical sense, the absolutely objective product becomes truly senseless, objectively, absolutely irrelevant. Yes, very strong words. Obviously people have said also that this music that is dehumanized, de-emotionalized, that might not be quite true, because if you look at the film scores, it certainly creates a sense of anxiety or creates a lot of negative emotions, suspense, or it creates otherworldly sense of, sci-fi uses it quite a lot. It seems a little bit low on the positive emotions of joy, and Messiaen is such a great exception, and he of course uses very carefully selected by his ear chords that would sound joyful and life-affirming. But basically, I would say that there are people who would suggest that there is something kind of unnatural, and there's a lot of studies have been done about our perception of atonal music, which I don't think, take into account the simple basic fact that we are immersed in tonality from the moment we are, born. Everything around us, all the pop songs, everything that sounds around us is based on tonality. So it's much more familiar to us than any kind of atonality. Some, say that it's completely kind of unintelligible. It's impossible to hear what's going on. I remember Mahannes Fahani, who is a very famous harpsichordist, while interviewed recently, he said, after 12 years of playing 12-tone music, I can hear all the rows. He can hear all these, when it goes backwards, when it's inverted, when it goes backwards and then inverted. Because he's experienced in that. And I thought, well, 12 years is a long time. But any professional musician will have studied at least 12 years studying tonal music. Yeah, so actually the understanding, the hearing of tonal music is just, on a high level, is just as difficult to achieve. So I wanted to end on an optimistic note and suggest that just as in a strange way the heyday of atonal music in the 50s was cut short by the reintroduction of chords, something like that might happen in reverse one day. We don't know how soon this will be, and we will suddenly start enjoying atonal music much more again. I think we should leave this possibility open, and in the meantime, I would invite you to keep listening, and I hope that some of the chords that we've learned about in this course, when you encounter them in music, you will greet them as old friends. Thank you very much for your attention.